Hiya, YouTubers. It's a rainy day down here at Speaker's Corner. I'm getting wet, you're not, fortunately, but I'm going to talk about another subject that has come up that we've got to deal with, and that is the difficulty concerning what the Pope said on, obviously, the Prophet Muhammad. It seems that whenever we talk about Muhammad, there is a reaction. There's a lot of emotions built onto this man Muhammad, and I can understand why. When I talk to Muslims, immediately they tell me Muhammad is important. You don't just say anything off the top of your head concerning him, because many Muslims tell me that he is closer to them than their own family, than their own brother, their own father. Because of that, it's important that you understand why the Pope then did say what he said. Now let's review. I don't have it in front of me, and I'll just try to do it off the top of my head. What I do know is that he was talking about a debate that was happening back in the 14th century between the Emperor Manuel II, who lived in Ankara, which is today Ankara, in what is present-day Turkey. The emperor, and he was about to see the hordes of Muslims come in and take over his country, and he was referring to this in a debate that he was having with a Persian scholar, a Persian cleric at that time. And he was referring, if you look at the whole text, he referred not only to the Prophet Muhammad, but he also quoted Surah 2, Ayah 256, which states there is no compulsion in religion. One of the peaceful verses. And then he goes on to say about the Prophet himself. He said, what is new about this prophet except that which is evil and inhuman, because he basically used the sword in propagating his faith. And then he went on and talked about the whole idea of how we must use logic and rationalism. We must use rational logic in our pronouncement of our faith, and we must never ever use the sword. And that is really what the debate was about. That was what his speech was about, that we must never ever use violence in propagating any faith, using the example of where the Prophet did this in the 7th century. Now, why did the Pope do that? Knowing that he was going to get a reaction, and certainly he must have known that he was going to get a reaction. It's obvious from the Danish cartoons, there was a huge reaction with that. He must have been aware of this, and I'm pretty sure he was aware of it. What the Pope was doing was very clever. Now remember, this Pope is highly educated. He has read the Quran. He has admitted so. He's had many debates with Muslims on the Quran. He certainly knew what would happen when he made these references to this debate that happened in the 14th century. So what was he doing? That's a good question. Let me see if I can try to answer it for you. In the West, here in the West, we have what we know as a separation of church and state. Jesus says specifically in the book of Luke that which belongs to Caesar you give to Caesar, and that which belongs to God you give to God. That which belongs to Caesar is the secular world, it's the state, it's politics, and we have politicians who deal with that area of our environment. But over on this side, the church has to deal with a whole other area that the state may not be involved in, and we separate the two, because anytime the two come together, the state takes over the church and basically corrupts the church. And that's why we're very careful not to basically participate one with the other. Now, it doesn't always work. Historically, there have been cases where that hasn't happened. But today, we do hold to that premise strongly. What George Bush does, or what Tony Blair does, or any of the politicians do, they do for political reasons. And now you might say they are men of faith, and so they may have some faith impact on what those decisions are, but basically they do what they're doing for political reasons. Therefore, they cannot get involved with the ideology of Islam. They cannot get involved with the theology of Islam. They cannot start coming over to this realm and start confronting this part of Islam, that which basically gives much of the impetus and certainly an awful lot of the foundation for what Muslims do today, because they bring the two together. Islam brings the church and state together, or the mosque and state together. And in doing that, every reference they make is founded on scripture, in the Quran, and also on the traditions, the hadith, the tafsir, the tahqiq, and the sirah of the Prophet. Therefore, the Tony Blairs and the George Bushes cannot basically confront the foundations of the faith that they are having such a problem with in the world today. They can only try to make the world safe by using bombs, bullets, and cruise missiles, and whatever form of violence that they can, to try their best. And we must therefore hold them to that sphere and hold them accountable to that. How are they then going to take on the foundations of this faith called Islam? How are they going to take on the Quran? And how are they going to take on the Prophet Muhammad, which are basically the two pillars that hold up this religion? They can't. That must be done and left to the state. And that's exactly what the Pope was doing. Basically, he was creating a debate. He was opening up a debate. He was starting something that only the church could do, and really only the church must do. And that's why he said what he was saying, knowing that the debate would be engendered and would be created, and therefore knowing that the church then would be, you might say, emboldened to carry that on. That's our remit. I belong to the church. I don't belong to the state. As a man of the cloth, as a man who does belong to the church, I must then take what the Pope has said. Now, he's not my Pope. He's not responsible for me. But I can appreciate what he has done. He has opened up that debate so that we can, therefore, take on the ideology that undergirds Islam. That ideology that is founded in their scriptures and also on their prophet. Excuse me, it's getting so wet. I'm just going to clean this with my fingers as I go along. There, I can see you a little better. How are you doing? Now, when you do that and when you look and see that the ideology that is Islam, you will realize that most of it, based on their scriptures and based on their prophet, needs to be confronted. Whether Muslims like it or not, we've got to start confronting those two foundations, the Quran and the prophet. The Pope started that. The very next week, Lord Carey here in Britain, who used to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, went one step further and basically quoted, if you look on the Times, you look and see what he says online, he said, we're not dealing with just a few extremists who are violent. We're not just dealing with a few extremists. We're dealing, basically, Islam at its very foundations is violent. What he was referring to is the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, because that is those are the foundations of Islam. He went much further than what the Pope did. It's fascinating that Muslims haven't attacked Lord Carey, because he represents the Church of England. And it's great to see someone of his caliber taking this step one step further, this argument one step further, which is what we need to do now today. And I encourage Muslims not to just emote over this and get angry with the Pope. Realize that the Pope is doing something that the state can't do, realizing he's creating, basically he is, with his function, he has the ability and he has the responsibility to start this debate. We've got to take that debate on. And that's where I want to encourage you here on YouTube to come back and forth. Let's make sure that we debate this. Let's do it intelligently. Let's don't emote over it. Let's don't start yelling at each other and calling each other's name using character assassination. For heaven's sakes, let's keep this down on a good debate mode. But more than that, let's make sure that those of us who are in the church and those of us who are in the mosque, that we're going back to our foundation and that we're supporting everything we say from those foundations, and we don't blame the state on this. Let's make sure that we are basically talking ideology versus ideology, because the only way you can take on one ideology is with a better ideology. And who do you think has the better ideology? Well, we've got it. Come on home. We want to share it with you, because if you want to talk about violence, if you want to talk about peace, there's only one place I know for peace. There's only one place I know where you're going to find violence. As much as Muslims hate to hear it, it is their prophet that did use violence, and it is their scriptures that have violence. And it's our Jesus Christ who is the man of peace, and it's the New Testament, the gospel, that is the gospel of peace. We've got it. If you want it, come on home. We'll give it to you. Let's continue this debate. It's a good one. Thank the Pope for starting it. Thank Lord Carey for taking it one step further. And it's our responsibility then for not only continuing this debate, but then coming to conclusions. And I hope you come to a conclusion. Come on home. We'd love to have you.